Hello, and welcome to Your Creative and Magical Life, which is hopefully your actual life, but is also this podcast, a show that explores how tarot, divination, and spirituality can help us live a life that sparkles with magic and creativity. I'm your host, Cecily Saylor. Let's make some magic. Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 10 of Your Creative and Magical Life. In this episode, we are exploring the Chariot, which is card number 7 in the Major Arcana. And it's the card that comes at the end of this first progression in the Major Arcana story. There's a way that tarot practitioners can arrange, well, anyone can do this, but they will talk about it and teach about it, arranging the Major Arcana to kind of break them up and look at them as this kind of storyboard where the Fool comes out of the progression and sits on the left side. And then that leaves 21 cards from the Magician to the World. And we arrange those in 3 lines of 7. And the first line is about the development of the self. The second line is the development of the self in relation to the subconscious. And then the third line is the development of the self in relationship to a super consciousness, a collective consciousness. So the Chariot sits at the very end of that first line of the development of the self. And it's said to represent willpower, ambition, drive, success, moving toward a goal and being purposeful. But there's more to the Chariot than that. And I'm excited to have and share with you this conversation with Hannah Levy, who is a writer, a poet, a creative thinker, and founder and editor of the Rebis, which is a journal that comes out annually. It focuses exclusively on the tarot, and each issue is dedicated to a different card in the Major Arcana. There have been 2 issues so far, the Wheel of Fortune, and then the second issue focused on the Chariot. And last year, I bought copies of both editions of the journal and was just really delighted and excited to see an entire publication focused on a single tarot card where there are a number of different contributors bringing fiction and nonfiction, essays, tarot spreads, artwork, all to help tarotists, tarot practitioners explore this single card from a number of different angles. So I was really delighted when Hannah agreed to come on to the show. You know, she edited an entire issue that's focused on the Chariot. So she seemed like a wonderful person to talk to. And then there's also the fact that putting together a literary journal is a Chariot type of undertaking. One thing we'll talk about with the Chariot is how there are different pieces of the vehicle that are required to move together in order for the charioteer to get where they want to go. Same with like a modern day car. We need our wheels all pointing in the same direction. We need gas in the tank. We need a steering wheel that's working. We need a gear shift. We need an engine. We need all the fluids topped off. We need a windshield that's clean and we can see through it. So all of these pieces bring that vehicle into motion. Same if we think about, a chariot from ancient times. So a literary journal is like that. You need to bring together these contributors. There's a lot of pieces of writing to edit. Then there's the artwork and there's the overall vision and receiving submissions and making decisions and notifying contributors. And then there's the whole process of actually making the journal into a thing, which requires figuring out which paper you're using and the printer you're going to use and how are you going to ship it and what's it going to cost and how are you going to tell people about it. So it's a lot. And Hannah is the spark, the genius, the big brain behind the impetus for this journal. And it's continued to grow as she collaborates with more people to make it happen. So I think you'll really get a lot out of this conversation, especially since Hannah is someone who thinks about tarot a lot, appreciates the tarot in a big way, and has also been in both the corporate 9 to 5 world and took herself kind of chariot fashion out of that world and into a different kind of life. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome, Hannah Levy, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you about the Chariot.
I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So to start, maybe can you tell listeners a little bit about your creative and magical life as you're experiencing it these days?
Yeah, sure. So I live in the Bay Area in Northern California. I spent about 15 years working for tech companies, doing marketing and brand work. And I had sort of a tower moment, as it happens, during the pandemic, where experiencing like a lot of burnout, process of having a baby, process of feeling values like misalignment with, capitalism and tech and all of that. So ended up leaving that industry and starting the Rebis, which is an annual print anthology that combines my love of tarot, art, and creative writing. And it has a social justice framework where our profits go to different orgs that focus on things like abortion rights, reparations, Indigenous land back movements. And I also have been focusing on my own creative writing practice. So, writing poetry and writing micro essays. I'm taking a lot of classes and kind of embodying like that fool beginner mindset again. And I spend a lot of my time parenting. So, I'm the daughter to an almost 7-year-old, and she is definitely a witch and has taught me a lot about magic and motherhood. And that has really deepened my spiritual practice, actually, and like my connection to earth magic and my own human cosmic connection. And yeah, I'm a Taurus sun, so it's my season.
Yes.
I love being outside and hiking in the redwoods and gardening, and I also go horseback riding when I can. So I feel really lucky to be in this like beautiful area, especially given the state of our current world and all of the horrible things that are happening right now. So it's holding the joy for some of the things that I get to work on and holding the grief of the way I feel about what's going on around me. So that's me.
Yeah, I certainly relate to that. And it's interesting you said you were the daughter of a 6-year-old, and I thought that was just a really beautiful slip because sometimes I think with my own mom, like we think maybe we used to be neighbors on a prairie somewhere. Like I think.
Oh yeah. Did I say that? That's really funny.
I'm not trying to correct you. I just thought it was like a really beautiful thing to, because I also think it goes both ways, even though it's like technically you're her mom.
Yes, but also like she's my biggest teacher. So I am kind of a daughter to her. She's kind of my mom in a way. And all things are cyclical, right?
Yes.
So maybe that is the right phrasing. That's a poem. Yeah. There's a poem in there. I'm gonna make a mental note of that. Thank you.
Beautiful. So speaking of tarot, one of your loves, how did you come to tarot? How did it come to you?
Yeah, so my best friend introduced me to tarot. She's been studying astrology and tarot for like over a decade. She's kind of like deep into that world. And she kind of strong-armed me into it during a time when I was feeling a lot of like stuck energy. I had taken on a really big role at a tech company. I was feeling imposter syndrome and feeling really restless, feeling that I was like in over my head. I had a newborn, and she took me to a class here in the Bay Area taught by Jessica Dorr, who at the time was living here. It was before she wrote her book, Tarot for Change. And I started following Jessica on Instagram. And I have always been really drawn to mythology and psychology and self-reflection. I've been in therapy for a very long time and really loved the idea of having like a visual framework for considering my purpose, considering my history and place in the world and what was going on around me. And I really loved the way that tarot forced me to like slow down, listen to myself, to engage with different senses, to look at different visual symbols. I loved like how one card could be this jumping off point where I could go deep into a rabbit hole of like symbols and story. And it just felt so rich. And I got really lost in it in a good way. And that hooked me. So I'm really grateful. And I kind of like, I was kind of like adjacent to it and I'd kind of like heard of it or pulled a card here and there, but I never felt like it was for me because it just felt really overwhelming. There's like 78 cards and I thought you had to like learn every single card and like memorize it like it was this language. And I learned kind of the hard way that the best way for me to interact with tarot is to have a relationship with the deck, with the artist who's making the deck, and to respond to each card kind of absent of what everyone else has to say about it. Of course, using different perspectives as reference points. I have a really beautiful tarot library now, but trusting that I could have my own take based on, how I responded to a color or to the figure in the card. And that took me, a few years to really sink into.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to hear. And I think that notion that we need to sort of academically learn it in order to use it is something that keeps people from using it sooner. So I'm glad you
Yes.
mentioned that. And I resonate also with that experience of, I think for people who are writers or do a lot of writing or think about writing and reading and language as a mode of representation for life and experience, there's something really refreshing when you get to tarot, and it just like the visual aspect really lands in a, for
Yeah.
me, like visceral gut kind of place, but activates that same, I think, yearning around story and meaning and all of that. So yeah, I think I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned that as well.
Listeners can't see, but I'm nodding deeply. I'm like, yes, yes, to all of that. Agree.
Beautiful. So our card for the moment is the Chariot. And one of the reasons I selected you for this episode, or invited you, I should say, is the Rebis, and a publication I became aware of in the last couple of years. And it was really exciting to see a journal focused exclusively on a tarot card. And it's a very beautiful journal, like full color. The paper's wonderful. And there's this really blended, varied assortment of different takes on a single card. And so the last issue that came out was the Chariot. And as an editor of a publication, I think that's a lot of Chariot work. We'll get into that as well. But before we get much further, I'd love to bring the card in and talk about it together and maybe teach a little bit about it together. I'm going to bring up the Smith Rider-Waite version of the card. And I wonder if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about what you see. Yeah, start with the basics, start with the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a card that I have historically, before doing this issue last year, I had a really tense relationship with. So every time I pulled it, I was kind of like, there's a lot going on in this card. The card shows a figure standing in a chariot, kind of an open vehicle. You're looking at this person head on, and they're standing there in a full suit of armor. They're wearing a crown with a wreath and stars. There's crescent moons on their shoulders. They're holding a staff and they're standing in this very stiff, straight position. In front of the chariot, there are two sphinxes. There's a black one and a white one. These are meant to represent, the creatures pulling the chariot. Although in the Rider-Waite-Smith version, we see no reins or no mechanism by which the sphinxes are actually connected to the chariot. And in the background, we see a city, kind of like a medieval walled city. And then, in the foreground, there's kind of like a stream and trees. And there's a sense that the figure has left the city and is like setting out in the opposite direction. The city is behind them.
Yeah. And that was very thorough, and thank you. And I'll just add that there's like a curtain above at the top of the chariot that he's kind of positioned underneath, that's blue, covered in stars, which reminds me a little bit of the crown we see in the Empress sometimes. And then on the front of the chariot, I'm noticing, like, without the chariot name, I might think he was like standing in a kissing booth or something. Like, it doesn't really
Yes.
look like, I mean, it doesn't look super romantic right now, but there's also on the front of this chariot or kissing booth a winged symbol and something that looks like a top there. And do you know anything about?
Yeah, it's like the yoni and the lingam symbol.
Okay, yeah. And those represent like kind of the origin of life, right? Like those are life force
Yeah.
symbols.
Yeah, the lingam is kind of the masculine energy, and the yoni is kind of the like womb feminine energy. And so together it's like creation, eroticism, sexuality, or you can kind of just think of it as like divine connection is another way that I've interpreted it.
Yeah. Thank you. And I don't know what to make of this. And I think maybe only today I'm really focused on it, looking at it closely with you. But I notice he's wearing sort of a warrior skirt type thing. And there appear to be these symbols on the strips of his skirt. And I don't think they're not sharp enough for us to really like understand what they are. But do you have any thoughts about those?
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring it up because I've never deeply considered it, but have thought about the word that comes to mind is hieroglyphics, just because of I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe it's because of the Sphinx is there, and because I know that the society associated with like Arthur Waite, what they were like very into like the Egyptian connection. But it definitely feels like language or a incantation or a mantra or a story maybe that the person is carrying with them. That's kind of where I've landed is this like inscription.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a spell.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of the high priestess a little bit. Like, she would know what all of that is. And the chariot comes at
Yes.
the end of that first line of the major arcana. We've been through the fool and the magician and the high priestess and the empress and the emperor and the hierophant and the lovers. And here we finish that progression with the chariot, which makes me think, now that we're talking about it, that there's probably a little bit of everything. Like the staff suggests the
Hmm.
magician, the curtains maybe suggest the empress, maybe those hieroglyphs suggest the high priestess. Yeah, like the charioteer needs all of these archetypes or their energies in order to go about his work. And maybe that's a good place to come to some of the meanings of the chariot. And I'm curious, yeah, what are the like big things that come to mind for you when this card arrives?
Yeah. So, I mean, for folks listening, if you were to Google, the chariot meaning, or if you looked at 78 Degrees of Wisdom, Rachel Pollack's book, or some of the, highly circulated traditional keywords for the chariot, might see that something like success or willpower, progress, control, independence. And I took those at face value for a really long time. And when I pulled the chariot, I kind of thought about, like muscling through and like getting in this war vehicle and like pushing forward and like setting off, and like doing my thing. And it's kind of a yes card, I guess, if you interpret tarot cards more binary. Some people like to look at cards that are yes cards and cards that are no cards, which take that as you will. Some days I feel like it's necessary and I need that. And some days I'm like, there's no yes or no in the tarot. Um, but I do still think that the chariot has a relationship to success, has a relationship to getting unstuck, to leaving what's familiar, to forward movement and momentum. But I think it's a highly considered card. It asks you, there's a confrontational element to the Chariot that I respond to, where it almost feels like it's a mirror. Like if you look at the card, it's like, can you see yourself in this figure? And what are you thinking and feeling? And what do you need to be holding on to? What kind of armor do you want to be wearing as you maybe leave something that's familiar and head off on your own? Or you're making a big life decision and you are trying to think about next steps for yourself and the things that, you want to be seen for, because the Chariot is this open vehicle, right? It's not like an enclosed car with no windows. It is a truly open air experience here. And so this person is not hiding, they're not cloaked. You see them face on in the card and they want to be seen almost. There's almost a little bit of a like desire for witnessing that this card comes with. So blending all of those things together, I mean, depending on the context, depending on the question, depending on other cards that I'm pulling, I might go anywhere from thinking about what am I witnessing in myself right now? What is coming up for me? What do I need to acknowledge and confront in order to get unstuck, in order to make the decision that I need to be making? What are the things that are within my control? What are the things that I can carry, that I can hold, that I can shield myself with? And where are my vulnerabilities? Where are the things that are going to be out of my control on this path, right? I can't control, the Chariot can't control the weather, right? They can't control other things that they might encounter on this journey, but they can carry certain things with them. And I know the Chariot has a relationship to Cancer and the crab and a concept of home, which we can get into later. Anyway, I could go on, but those are some of the things that come up. And it's a convoluted card because there's so much symbolism to interact with here.
Yeah, thank you. That's so rich. And there were things there too that hadn't occurred to me before. And one of those, as you notice, or as you mentioned, the charioteer presenting this desire to be seen, there also seems to be this really powerful seeing quality, like the charioteer as well is seeing. There's a really focused look on their face, and I imagine them looking out over the horizon, reminding me a little bit of the Knight of Pentacles, like studying what's out there and really sizing up the world and kind of figuring out a path for themselves and this journey that's about to begin. And you mentioned Cancer, and on this podcast, we have not talked a whole lot about zodiac signs and the major arcana, but we have a little bit, but each of the cards has a zodiac sign associated with it. And the Cancer card, or the Cancer association, was a little bit of a head scratcher for me at first, because this card feels so willful that it reminds me more of like a cardinal sign, like Aries or Capricorn. And I guess Cancer is a cardinal sign as well, now that, shame on me. But Cancer being so like soft and loving and nurturing. And the one thing that kind of brought it together for me was the crab part of Cancer, and how the crab wears their home on their body, and it's the exterior that creates the structure. And as you were mentioning, when the card comes up, kind of asking yourself how, what do you need? Where are you vulnerable? Where are the strengths? That this card is about pulling different things together to create a vehicle for yourself to move. And that part of the Cancer association really makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that question that you landed on of like, how do we go from here to there, and what container is going to help us, and which one may break down a little sooner than we're wanting it to.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, the card is the Chariot, right? The card is the vehicle itself.
Right.
But in this version, and in many versions that I've seen, there's not movement portrayed. There is actually a sense of stasis. The sphinxes in this card look like they're seated or laying down or resting. You don't see like the side angle where the wheel is the focus. The wheels are kind of like hidden along the sides there. You kind of have to like really notice them. And it doesn't seem like there is a lot of momentum happening. And so I do think it's that moment of like pause and reflection on like what pace do you need and what do you need to get started? It's almost like that 0 to 1 energy
Mm,
too. And for someone who might be in a chaotic period of their life where there's so much happening and there is a lot of movement and there is a lot of change, the chariot might come up when you need to recollect, when you need to pause and think about, is this pace sustainable? Or is the path you're on, are those grooves that you're currently in, is the hamster wheel working for you or is it not working for you? Yeah, I think it's this like connecting stagnant energy to movement piece that is
yeah.
interesting to me with the chariot.
Yeah. Like it does look like they're about to set out, but it also reminds me of like the pit brakes in a car race. I feel like I'm using the most basic language for that. My dad
Oh,
used to
that's
watch them,
right.
but yeah, pit stop where you change the wheels get changed and they retop your fluids and all of that before you get back on the loop. And either whether you're starting out or kind of in the middle, this card may be asking you to be like, do you have the fuel? Do you have the lubricants? Do you have the right frame
Absolutely.
for all of this? Do you have a favorite version of this card? And if you do, like, what does it look like?
Yeah, I do. So the Wild Unknown deck by Kim Krans shows the chariot as a horse. And it's you see the front of the horse, and the horse is wearing like a pentacle necklace around its neck. And the horse has a crescent moon etched into its forehead. And then in the background of the card, because it's a black and white kind of illustration, but in the background of the card, there's like a small sun at the top with like radiating rays of light. And I really love the interpretation of the horse here because personally horses are very meaningful. I have a relationship with horses, and it also feels a little bit more than the Rider-Waite-Smith version, like more primal, like a little bit more of a connection to like celestial, spiritual than material, because it's, horses versus like a human figure. And horses are so attuned to energy. They also each have their own personalities, but they like band together and enjoy community. And something that I come back to a lot with the chariot is the sense of like they're alone, but they have these like animals that are pulling or supposed to be helping them pull the chariot. And like, how are they in relationship with the animals? How do they work together? Because they're not the only figure on that card of the Rider-Waite-Smith card. And using the keyword of control with the chariot, when you're on a horse, when a human is on a horse, you're holding on to reins. But if you study horseback riding, you're taught that there's a lot more subtle ways that you can express what you want the horse to do. So, like gentle squeezes with your calves, or the way you position your shoulders when you're trying to make a turn. And the reins are there for your safety and for navigation, but they're not the first cue that I use to direct my horse. I'm actually only using them in like a big meaningful way when I like want to stop moving, like when I want to like whoa the horse and pull it back, which I find interesting. So horseback riding is a lot about embodiment and about like self mastery. And I wrote down this quote because there's this writer, Linda Kohanov, who wrote the Tao of Ekis, which is like all about spirituality and horses. And she also has an oracle deck called The Way of the Horse. And
Mm.
she says that horses value cooperation over competition, relationship over territory, responsiveness over strategy, emotion and intuition over logic, and process over goal. And I just think that's like so spot on for the lessons of the chariot. Yeah, I think especially that last one, the process over the goal, which is so cheesy if you connect it to like, it's about the journey, not about the destination. But like, really, that's what the chariot is teaching us. So take that for what you will.
Yeah, I wondered, that card was coming to mind as I was thinking about that question for you. I was like, I wonder if that would be your choice. And I love that quote about horses. And I think humans have a really, generally speaking, a very distorted read on horses, or we really, for many, many years, have sort of been very extractive with horses. And there's like this domination of them, and they need to take us places and do our work, and you have to tame them. And I don't have as much experience with horses as you do, but I've had a bit more in the last couple of years, and being around several at the same time, just noticing the embodiment that comes to me being in their presence. And I've heard they can hear a human heartbeat from like 4 feet away. I don't know if that's true, but just like this co-regulation happens and this exchange of energy. And there's like even though we can use them or collaborate with them to go very fast, they also tend to move very slow. They sort of a step at a time, grazing throughout the day, and so I love that idea that like the chariot isn't about choosing your thing and then dominating your way into the achievement of it, but this collaborative process with whatever spiritual energy has invited you into collaboration to create something, and like moving at that kind of collaborative exchanged pace versus like push, 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 push. So I love that you bring that up.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say that if you are successful at the expense, like, or if your success requires domination and perfectionism and control over others, and if there is a sense of extraction in what you are doing, or what, who you work for, how you move about the world, I think especially in America and like our Western civilization, like we need to have a reckoning with that notion of success. And there's an essay in the Rebis on billionaire culture, where the author, they unpack this a lot, and thinking about historically who we've studied and the figures in our collective consciousness that we have elevated to success, and then thinking about how did they become successful, and then why we don't look at other types of careers, other types of movements or ways of impact as being successful. There's a lot there, and that has been a personal reckoning of mine as someone who worked in tech and worked for billionaires, and had to navigate a space in which I felt really uncomfortable all the time about what was being said behind closed doors.
Yeah, I think that maybe positions us nicely for you to read the first couple paragraphs of your editor's note in this Chariot issue of the Rebis, which speaks to that a little bit. And then I'd love to go a little deeper.
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. The Chariot is a portal into the unknown. If you have ever taken a big risk, done something that scares you, moved away from what feels safe, stretched yourself in a perfect way, if you have ever felt the erotic thrill of stepping towards a deeply held desire, the ground beneath you shifting as you move in closer, then you know what it feels like to climb into the chariot. This is not a comfortable ride with clear direction and paved roads. It is a departure, a migration, an exodus, but it is also a homecoming. I know this journey well. I've been a charioteer for the past few years after embarking on a new life path, one that curves away from the narrow roads I've grown accustomed to. I walked away from an established career. I changed how I approach my relationships. I set and held boundaries. I'm learning how to dismantle old ways of thinking, how to emotionally excavate until I reach a place that feels authentic and true. It's been isolating at times, full of uncertainty and fear, but it's also been expansive, liberating, and it has brought me more love and joy than I could have ever imagined. For the first time in a long time, I am able to name what I want and walk towards it.
So beautiful. Thank you for reading that for us. The whole editor's note is very beautiful. I love that notion of departure, which we've talked a little bit about looking at the card. And, you mentioned in the note more specifically this departure from a career that you were building in tech. And I think there are a lot of creative spirits out there who, wish we could spend our time creating and doing the things that feel nourishing and exciting, the things that we feel passionate about, but we have to pay the bills. And we often end up in jobs that are just really hard for us to continue to go to as the years pile up. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you decided to leave and what was going on around you in your life that made you feel like it was time. How did you make that choice?
Yeah. So I just want to fully acknowledge like there is privilege in departure. Exactly what you mentioned keeps people at jobs, that they don't want to be going to and would wish that they could leave from. And it is a huge risk to step away from something that is safe and secure. And often people can't. Like they don't have a backup plan. They don't have any sort of safety net. And so after working in tech, and my partner also worked in tech for many years, like we had the financial ability to like reevaluate those decisions of staying or going. And like we could have both just stayed and like continued on with like our set path in life. But we felt like since we did have a little bit of safety net cushion, since we did have the financial privilege of reconsidering, we couldn't imagine another way of doing it. So both of us kind of stepped away, first just as a sabbatical, like as a way of testing and seeing like, do we really want to make this massive life change? Like, do we really want to get off, and dip out? Because the fear of what if I leave tech for a few years and then I'm not marketable anymore and I can't rejoin if I need to, or something happens and I need to get a tech job again and I can't. And there's a lot of imposter syndrome for like, this is all I know. This is all I can do. This is the only way I can make impact. This is kind of the niche that I have carved out for myself in the world. And like, where's my purpose? I can't be an artist or a writer. Like, I am just a corporate marketer, and that's how I've been trained. And I did spend most of my life being very scared of change and changing my mind, and really scared of doing things that other people perceive to be different, as a personal thing. So having a community in tech, living here in the San Francisco area where many of my friends worked in tech, where I'd networked, where I had kind of risen to a certain level, of seniority when I was managing a team. I also managed a community called Tech Ladies, which was a community of women and non-binary folks that were trying to break into tech. And I mentored people, and I just was like, this is my home. Like, this is where I felt like a sense of belonging, even as I felt like all of my energy draining from me at any given day or any given moment. So yeah, all that to say, I just really want to acknowledge the privilege that I had, because I don't think it's possible. And I just want to be really transparent about that. And I do think there's a lot of people that have the privilege to leave and don't. And for personal reasons, or because they love what they do, or because they love their position, they have ambition, they like power, they like money. So I think that all of that was kind of swirling around in my head. And I had a really weird path towards working in tech. I went to school for journalism. I worked as a freelance journalist in Ecuador after college. I started a music blog and worked as a server at restaurants in my 20s, where I was like trying to run this music blog with a friend. And I had a lot of financial instability in those positions, and a lot of uncertainty and doubt over my path in life, because I kind of hopped around. And so I really grappled with like choosing a path less traveled and with taking risk. And when I got into working in tech and got on that wheel, it felt really good. It felt like, oh, like I can make money this way, and I can, climb the corporate ladder, and there's so much stability and safety. I mean, there's volatility in tech, But there was a sense at the time, especially when I was joining back in like 2010-ish, where it was like fast growth companies and every company was going through an IPO, and like Facebook and Instagram had just acquired Instagram. And it was like those early days of the tech bubble. And I was working nonstop, and I was, exposed to the world of venture capital firms and the men mostly who were making the decisions about where money flowed. And I had a baby and came back from mat leave and felt really just like disgusted with everything. And so it took a little bit of risk, personal risk, emotional risk to step away. And I made a lot of life changes as part of that too, like personal life changes, relationship changes, the way I engaged with family, the way I set boundaries for myself, friendships that I had to leave. So there was a lot going on like inside of me. And I think there was like an exterior change, and then there was like all the interior changes that come along with it. And I think one of the things I talk about in the editor's note is this idea of something I wrote in my journal when I was 19 years old was, is it still success if no one thinks it is successful but me? And I think that happened when I was leaving tech. I got a lot of people, asking, but you're so successful, like you're doing so well, like you're a director at these leading these marketing teams. And like, why would you want to leave that? Like leave your position and the power to do stuff where it's like, who knows, like if you're going to be known for anything else, right? And so I had to kind of grapple with like what felt authentic to me and like how I was perceived. And I think perception and how you're seen is a big part of the chariot too.
Yeah. I just got some chills there. I think that's so huge. And I think even for people who do have perhaps the privilege to leave a job that maybe doesn't feel values aligned anymore or doesn't feel fulfilling, that perception piece can be the primary barrier to walking away because or changing a lot of things. Like I remember when I quit drinking, there was a big fear around perception, even though, it was going to make me healthier and more present. There was this like, what will people think about me making this choice? And also, no one's ever perceived me as a sober person. And so, how is that going to work? But I think to your point, in this particular context of work, when everyone in your world sees you that way, it's like you're taking off your skin or something. And it's like, who will recognize me, and will the people stay, or can I live without them? It's a really big piece. So I'm glad you bring that up.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting. It's such a small thing, and it's a little silly in retrospect, although at the moment it felt big. But I had gone off Instagram in like 2019 and 2020. I just had no energy and didn't have anything to say or post, and was, working and momming, and didn't have anything creative really in or late 2020, early 2021. When I really started doing more of my own creative work. I was still working full time, but I was like taking back my time. I was like writing poetry in the evenings and like stealing an hour here and there to like pull cards. And I started writing poems based on tarot cards. And I started putting them up on Instagram. And I had like, my Instagram it's just like my friends and community. It's like, I'm not an influencer. I have no large platform. I'm not like super influential there, but it was mostly like people in my life that knew me personally. And I got all of these messages from people that were like, and texts from people that were like, are you okay, Hannah? Like, what's going on? Like, what's happening to you? Like, are you like, what are you going through? Because I was posting like these, like I'd never shared my poetry publicly before. I had never shared creative work publicly. I'd always done work for other companies, even when I was working on the music blog with my friend. Like, it's a music blog. It wasn't like my personal, deeply held desires and beliefs and values. And it was really scary to start publicly sharing myself, publicly sharing my interior world that maybe only a handful of people who knew me intimately, really intimately, And maybe not even those people had seen. Like my partner had never even read my poetry. So, like going really deep and pulling something from within you and then offering it up to the world, whatever you are doing, is so fucking scary.
Yeah.
And especially when it might change how people perceive, when you anticipate that it might change people's relationship with you. Oh, if these people know, like, how sexual I am, or if these people were to think about all my like imposter syndrome and self-doubts, like then what would they think of me? And when you're sharing what's really vulnerable, especially in the form of something like art, poetry, yeah, I've had to get over a lot of that. And it's still happening. Like I'm still not fully 100% there, but I have moments now where I'm just like, this is it. Like this is what represents me. And if it turns people off, then I think I'm much more okay with it than I used to be.
Thank you for sharing that, you're like, maybe this is a small thing, but it's a big thing. And I think that makes me think about how capitalism really narrows us down.
Mm,
And when we get really attached to our jobs and moving upward in terms of having a better title or a bigger paycheck or getting that bonus, or there's this like false, I think there is real community inside of companies because human beings relate to each other and there's really
yeah,
cool humans who do these jobs. And so, but there's also like within the company the sense of like we're a family that gets exploited to kind of keep you spending an outsized portion of your life on the work. And in order to be in the family that they proclaim, there's like no one's trying to hear about your poetry or your weird hobbies or and so
oh yeah,
we really like compartmentalize ourselves in order to keep participating. And I think that's part of the pain that comes up in many people as we're facing that fork in the road. Like, do I stay? Do I go? It's like you get tired of hiding that and you can sort of see it in your friends' reactions. It's like if you're writing, are you okay? And you're
yeah,
like, yeah, I'm actually healing and getting better as I
yeah.
write poems.
You have to really be in this like ready to invest and believe in yourself. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the chariot requires you to come home to yourself in so many ways.
Mm, I love that. So you also mentioned in the editor's note that the chariot became like a card that you started seeing more of and kind of that nudge type of card that shows up when you're at such a fork in the road when you were thinking about starting the Rebis. And also in this modern day world, starting a literary journal is not like guaranteed to bring in money. And so I can you talk a little bit about how that card worked for you as you were considering it and yeah, how it created that nudge.
Yeah, I wanted to do something. I wanted to be in relationship with my creativity in a different way. And I had all my experience had been in digital content creation. So like, all the tech work I had done was online blogs and social media marketing and email marketing. And I was perpetually online and I wanted something that I could like touch and hold. And like, I wanted to truly feel confident that I could do something different. And also, I wanted to be in community and I really wanted to be in like reciprocity in a communal way where I was helping other people be seen for the things that they wanted to be seen for too, which is how like the initial idea for the magazine came about. But I did get really overwhelmed by the project. I mean, this is truly like I've never done, a print publication before, figuring out like what my vision was, what it was going to look and feel like. I did not want to pour all of this energy into something that someone would like buy and then toss, which deterred me from going, the route of like a traditional feel of a magazine, which is like, thinner paper. That would have been a much more accessible price point, to be totally honest with you, but felt like really out of values with what I was trying to create. And so the chariot came up a lot as a way for me to, as a kind of a reminder to like be in touch with my intuition and to trust that like in this moment where I had to make all of these new kinds of decisions and I was kind of alone on this journey at the very beginning, that all I needed to do was to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And I didn't need to focus so much on the outcome. They focus so much on, would people like this work? Are they going to buy it? Are they going to, am I going to get any contributors? It was just like, I had to just focus on really the process. And I said to myself, like, if the only person that's into this is me, I have to be okay with that at first, because I think it can take a really long time for a project like this to build momentum. And so I did the first issue, the Wheel of Fortune issue. I brought on a creative partner and we had, I invited a lot of people to contribute because we had no Instagram presence. We had no brand presence. I had no email marketing. I had no follower base. I had no subscribers. So it was truly just like contacting people that I thought would be a good fit and asking them to have faith and to kind of like believe in me. And after doing that issue, which did really well, like, I mean, for a brand new baby issue, and we got into some Bay Area bookstores that I was pitching. And, like the sales went well for it as well, more than I didn't even have a number that I could have imagined, but the ability to just pay our writers and to pay for the printing of the publication. And then, like I mentioned, I really wanted this like social justice initiative where like leftover profits get donated because I wanted to feel like art and justice and collective healing could kind of be connected in some way, because so many people see art as like, well, like, what does art do for the world? And I think that's a whole other conversation, but I wanted a very clear connection for myself there. But I went into like creative hibernation after that because I felt like I wasn't sure what card to do next. I felt a little bit like burned out. I was like ready to like, I was thinking, okay, I need to like start the next issue immediately. And I was really overwhelmed by social media. I mean, the state of like in social media marketing at the time, and even now it's even worse, but it was just like, I am not a video producer. I am not a designer, visual designer. Like to create content that would get sticky on social media and go viral in order to get people to discover the magazine was just like super overwhelming to me. And I put a lot of pressure on myself there. And, like everyone was like, you need to get on TikTok and you need to do, and I was just like, I can't participate in social media because like being on these platforms is depressing me.
It's like getting a tech job again.
Oh yeah. No, it's truly, I was like, I left social media. I left this world of like digital marketing. I just like, why can't we do things without the internet anymore? But I mean, anyway, that's a whole other discussion
Amen.
as well.
Yeah.
But so I wasn't sure if I wanted to commit to another magazine. I was like, maybe that was like a nice little like side project that I did. And so I spent like all of December of 2022 and a little bit of January of 2023 being like, yeah, maybe that was that. Like I did it, pat myself on the back. But I kept pulling the Chariot card whenever I thought about the publication. And I kept thinking about like setting a pace that felt right for me. And I kept thinking like, well, maybe like you said, like I can be multidimensional. Like I don't have to approach this as my full-time job. Like I can diversify the kind of work that I do and what I offer up and the kind of editing work I do and the kind of writing that I'm doing. And I can give myself permission to like do other things than just this one project. And so I started to trust that too. So even though like momentum felt like it had stalled, I started to trust that like the project could be woven into, the paths that I wanted to take in life. And I also had to tell myself that like I didn't work for like a fast growth startup anymore. And I couldn't expect like I'm not gonna like sell 1 million copies of this magazine. So I tried to like divorce myself from what success looked like. And I had to figure out like, okay, how much do I need to be selling in order to make this project sustainable? And like anything else after that is extra and nice. And like I'm not aiming for viral success. I'm not aiming for getting on some bestseller list or like becoming, uber successful. So I think that was a reframe that the Chariot reminded me of too, that like if the momentum was such that I could just sustain working on this project, that was enough for me. I didn't need to get like 100,000 subscribers in order to make it worth doing. And I think that that took a lot of effort for me to do. Like the idea that like if 500 people bought my magazine, like that was amazing. Like that blew my mind. Like if I got 500 people in a room, it would feel like a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of like do some of that inner work to feel good about it.
Hey, friends, it's me again with a brief interruption because I have a special gift to share with you. First of all, Hannah has graciously arranged for listeners of this podcast to save 25% on the Chariot issue of the Rebis. So if you're interested in getting a copy and dorking out about this card even further, you can save 25% when you purchase your copy using the discount code typewriter tarot, all caps. I'm going to put that information in the show notes. This is going to take the price from $33 to $24.75. I'll repeat this discount code at the end of the episode too. And again, it'll all be in the show notes for you. And I also wanted to remind you that if you're enjoying these conversations where we dive deeply into tarot cards, if these explorations are expanding your understanding of tarot and even your understanding of yourself, there's another publication that I think you might enjoy, one that I made myself. It's called Tarot for Creative Spirits, and it's a workbook slash playbook slash coloring book that contains journaling and creative prompts for every card in the tarot. I designed this to help folks deepen their tarot practice by understanding the cards through their own personal experience, which is the best way to remember something is to connect it to yourself, to find an embodied experience with the thing. So every journaling prompt allows you to do that. It also allows you to explore your own sensibility of a card apart from what all the guidebooks say. So instead of going straight to the guidebook when you pull a card and getting sometimes some helpful information, but sometimes an interpretation that doesn't really feel like it's for you or doesn't feel like it's for you in that moment. And then you kind of feel deflated and sort of walk away from the reading with this closing down kind of feeling. And the journaling workbook is instead meant to help you start with yourself, to put the guidebook over to the side for a while and explore what you think could be happening for you with this card. And from there, things start to open up and expand. And we kind of stay in a place of curiosity around how a card might be talking to us. And then later on, we can consult the guidebook and see if there are any correlations there. But every one of us gets to interpret the tarot in our own way. Yes, it's helpful to know some of the traditional meanings and definitions, but tarot is also an evolving art. And there's a lot of conversations about how we explore gender fluidity in the tarot, how we explore an anti-oppression lens in the tarot, how we decolonize the tarot. So doing your own work with the cards is part of that larger evolution, and I highly encourage it. The book is also meant to help you explore yourself, which is something maybe you've picked up on as a theme in this podcast. We're exploring the creation of the self. We are our own artwork that we create in this life. And the more we know about ourselves, what we like, what works for us, the way that we like to move and navigate life, the way that we like to be in relationship, what our values are, where we can communicate more easily and where we struggle to communicate, how we like to play, how we like to create, all of that. The more we know about that, the more we can steer our lives in a direction that feels aligned and purposeful, even though we're living in a world that is really hard to swallow sometimes and is becoming an increasingly scary place. So this book is meant to support you. It pulls on a lot of things I bring up with my clients in creativity coaching when I'm working with people to help them explore their spiritual orientation, their relationship to creativity, also their relationship to a creative business. the kinds of questions that I ask my clients are also questions that are in this book. So you can get your copy now, and I have a discount code, another one for you. This one is Magical Life, one word, all caps, and you'll save $10 off. That'll take the price from $68 to $58, which includes shipping inside the US. And it also comes with a mystic message, which has a tarot card and an interpretive poem that come together. And every time I'm shipping out a book, I'm pulling a card just for you, the person who ordered the book. And I'm going to wrap your book in a beautiful paper. I'm going to put that mystic message inside with a nice little note from me. And then it's going to travel the world to find you. And then it becomes your magical book. So it's meant to support you. It's meant to bring more creativity and magic into your life, just like this podcast. So if you're interested, I hope you'll check it out. So redefining success and the inner work that required, I'm curious because I believe the universe, let's say, sort of works in this way that when you're following a path that is aligned for you, that magical benefits materialize and we get to see like returns. I hate to use corporate language, but we see, let's use gardening language. We see some of the fruits come to bear, but sometimes the fruits are like different than we expected. And I'm wondering if there were any beautiful surprises that helped you redefine success or expand your definition of success, things that like markers you weren't even really thinking about initially that showed up as bountiful forms of abundance or affirmations around the choice you had made?
Ooh, this is a really beautiful question. I think the biggest thing for me, especially, given the context of the pandemic, was that this project has introduced me to so many people. And I have reframed success for myself, and not just with the Rebis, but like on a personal level across many areas of my life. I think about fulfillment and happiness as being in relationship to the depth of my connection to other humans.
Mm.
And so just this conversation, we've been talking for almost an hour about tarot and living a creative life and all the, different ways that we're interpreting these very sticky, uncomfortable conversations related to, ambition and capitalism and our relationship to those things. And like the depth that we're able to get to is so profound in an age where our attention is divided so much. And when we are trained to scroll past art and poetry, and like tap, tap, give it a little like and move on, and to just sit with, the content and to sit with the people. So I've made a lot of really meaningful friendships that are personal friendships, not just like professional, like acquaintances. These are people who I text and know their birthdays and know what's happening in their inner lives and celebrate their pregnancies and grieve, with them through this project. And I think that is lost now a little bit.
Yeah.
And it makes me really sad that it's lost. And I think the internet used to be a place of connection, and it still is. Like, I gotta say, like,
we're using it to have this conversation.
Right? And I introduced people to the Rebis and made connections through Instagram, DMing people. Discovered a lot of my favorite astrologers and spiritual practitioners and writers and poets. Now I'm in like kind of a poetry threads space and, through Substack and other types of platforms. So there is this connection tool, but it's really dissatisfying when you leave it online, I guess. And it has become so much more fulfilling for me to transform those relationships into more dynamic, personal connections and have that truly be like the community. Because I think, I mean, this is the kind of archetype of the star, which is our next issue. But I think community and the collective is going to be more and more and more important as our politics becomes more fractured, even more fractured. And as there is upheaval and social movements and tension and division. And so finding the people that you really align with, and it can be hard to do it in person, like IRL, where you live, because so many of us live in communities where, we don't necessarily feel a sense of belonging, or we kind of are stuck in a home or an environment in which the immediate people around us are not quote unquote our people. And so figuring out what community meant to me and deepening my relationships with individuals, that is not something that I scale. This is something that I like invest in mindfully and give attention to intentionally. And it's like a handful of people now, but those people are everything to me. So I think that's what I want to be doing, which is like having meaningful conversations like this.
Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. And I think such a needed reminder. And in this way, like the Rebis sort of became the chariot for you to connect in different ways. And I just want to point out to listeners that, there was that moment you've described around leaving your tech job and all of the relationships you had built in that space, some of which I imagine survived, but some, as you mentioned, did not, that another community emerged for you. And that's one thing I love about doing this work. And it is a struggle. Sometimes I'm like, is this going to sustain me? Is this going to support me enough? And I do have the option of finding other forms of income or, taking jobs, different kinds of jobs. But it does afford me something that's so rich, which is connection, with people like you and people who share this interest and both a concern for the world that I think I'm feeling deeply, but also this interest in things that are beyond the materialism and the consumerism and like just the 3D-ness of everything. It's like, I must now live in some spiritual way. And it pains me sometimes to have conversations that are devoid of that. And so to find other people who will dork out with you for in excess of an hour about a tarot card is just so refreshing.
Yeah, and in a vulnerable way, and like that, what I like intimacy and vulnerability. Like, there's this term that I came across recently, which is like radical closeness, and like that is all I crave is like get real, go deep, connect in a way that beyond that surface. But I just want to acknowledge that, like, it's hard to hold the tension. It's hard to hold that, but that's the chariot's energy too, which is like, if you consider the physics of a chariot as a vehicle, it's like propelled forward if the creatures pulling it are like running in slightly opposite directions, like holding that tension. It's like you have to hold the tension of movement outward and forward in order to like get unstuck. And I think and holding, the grief and the joy, and holding the need to be online and the desire to connect in person. And like we have to learn how to alchemize.
Yeah. I think one thing I wanted to explore a little bit with you as well is the, let's say, mundane work of editing a journal, which requires a lot of moving parts. It seems like very chariot work to me. Inviting people to submit, selecting pieces, you bring on guest editors, and then you have, in the Chariot issue, I believe there were 28 contributors bringing in writing and also visual imagery, photography, and art. And so there's, choosing the pieces, choosing the contributors, and then editing all of that, pulling it together, ordering it into a progression. What kind of paper are you going to choose? what printer will you choose, what size paper, what binding, how many copies do you order, and then marketing it and distributing it and talking to bookstores. And so there's so many pieces you have to pull together to bring it into the world. Is there anything you want to sort of say about managing that or kind of holding chariot energy as you do that work?
Yeah, well, speaking of tension of opposites, the creative aspects of it are so fun and playful and challenging, but in a way that feels really generative. The curation process, actually holding someone's first draft, reading it, giving feedback, the trust and relationship between the writer and the editor and the artists that are, that we're workshopping their artwork. Like it is really, really intense and so energizing to connect with someone else's artwork, that's something that is not my own writing, that does not come from within, and then to kind of be able to help shape it or mold it or provide some sort of scaffolding around it while maintaining its integrity, while maintaining its voice. That is where I thrive. Like I could do that all day. But I also have to do the business stuff and the logistics. You mentioned our team. I am a team like on a day-to-day basis of one, of just me, kind of holding the reins, so to speak. But I have a creative director who's kind of a part-time support when we're working on each publication. Her name is Javiera Lopez. She designed all the illustrations for Jessica Doerr's book, Tarot for Change. And they just came out with a deck, which is a really beautiful interpretation of some of the Rider-Waite Smith artwork. It's just really lovely. And so she's she's helping me out because she's an artist and speaks the language of visual artists. She does a lot of the watercolors for the magazine. She designed our covers. And so she helps with the selection of the art. And then for the wheel, I did that whole issue myself without any other editorial support. And I felt like going into the Chariot issue, I felt like I wanted to expand, that I thought that I wanted to, first of all, gut check my own biases as a white woman in this position. And I wanted to make sure that any blind spots that I might have, to make them visible. And I also craved editorial partnership because I did have a little bit of self-doubt and I did feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I had one of our contributors for the Wheel of Fortune issue, a woman named Maria Minnis. I had been following her work ever since she contributed to the Wheel issue. And she was working on a book called Tarot for the Hard Work, which is an anti-racism manual for tarot readers or for folks who are interested in tarot. And I just really connected with a lot of her content. And so I invited her to guest edit, which involved helping with the curation process. So reviewing all the submissions and giving feedback, helping with the editorial process. We kind of did a little bit of divide and conquer. Like she took some first drafts, I took some first drafts, and then we kind of swapped perspectives and was just really collaborative in like how we brought it to life, the sequencing, the ordering of the publication. And I learned so much from that collaboration and felt like the issue was so much stronger because of a different perspective that was making some of the decisions too, that I decided to do that again. And our guest editor for the Star issue, Charlie Claire Burgess, who wrote a book that came out last year called Radical Tarot, I had read their chapter for the Star when I was first thinking about selecting that card and like underlined every single word, basically. And I've been following them on Instagram. And I was like just so drawn to their point of view and felt like they have a really strong background in MFA and have written many books and designed and created 2 different tarot decks. So I felt like they would make a really incredible editor for this issue. And so they are collaborating with me for the Star. So yeah, that's like the beautiful part of it. The stuff that is difficult is like the distribution, self-publishing, working with printers. I switched printers in the middle of the process because I realized that I could find a better price point for the quality of paper that I was looking for. There was a whole like paper shortage that
Mm-hmm.
happened in 2022-ish. It was a shipping logistics, thing going on with the whole world of commerce was like at a standstill because of, shipping routes and the pandemic and other things. So yeah, figuring out like product market fit and where to distribute it and which audiences and pitching myself to book fairs and witchcraft markets and all those things has been it's a little bit more of the slog. It's like the unsexy work, but like
Mm-hmm.
the important work. And I've been doing a lot more experimentation this time around. I've been hesitant to do a lot of digital content because my vision has always been like something that is only available through the tangible print experience because I'm stubborn and like want people to get off their phones. But
Yes.
I'm thinking more and more about, especially with the nature of the star, which is like Aquarius and
Mm.
innovative and futurism. I'm thinking a little bit more about that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It's an undertaking and a beautiful result, a beautiful product. So thank you for taking all of that on for us tarot dorks out here. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
it's honestly like it's been so wonderful and I feel a sense of this is like an offering, and
Mm,
it's not a cheap product. Like the Chariot issue was priced at $33, which is like the cost of a
yeah.
hardback book. And the price point is such because the paper quality, the cover, the full color experience, and then we
Hmm.
pay every single artist and writer. And so I have to balance it out. And then, I'm also really interested in this sense of, contributing to all these social justice orgs. And so I think we're at a point, gosh, I haven't looked at the latest statement in a little while, but I think we've contributed over $4,000, almost $5,000 across three different social justice organizations. And so I am hopeful that people feel like it's this exchange where they spend a little bit more money, on this like more considered purchase and they get this like art journal that they can hold on to or gift after they've read it and that they can really like slow down with. And then their money is going to artists, going to writers, going to these social justice orgs that hopefully align with their values. There's a mission statement on the website with more information about each of the organizations if anyone wants to like, double click and go deeper. But that's the kind of exchange that I'm hoping to prompt to focus more on like how does this making you feel about your consumption habits?
Yeah.
Um, rather than like, there's a world in which I could sacrifice a lot on the quality of the publication and dial down the price point considerably, but the experience would be very different. So I'm playing with that, and feedback is really helpful for me hearing from people about why they would want to purchase it or why they wouldn't or what the barriers are. Accessibility is important to me. I've started putting up like PDFs at a lower price point just in case
Mm,
people live abroad and can't pay. The shipping costs are crazy. Like it's one of those things that
right.
I learned. That was a weird learning uncover where I was like, wait, why does it cost so much money to ship this to London? Like
It's
I
true.
don't understand. And so I started feeling really terrible because I was like, oh no, if you live like abroad, I don't want you to have to pay like $20 to get this single magazine shipped to you.
Right.
I do not know how to solve for that. So up the PDFs went. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's such, I celebrate you living and working in a field that is incredibly, just always emphasizing more profit where labor is extractive. Like tech companies are not really like they will try to dismantle any union inside of their company most times.
Yeah.
Um, and taking, being inside that model and leaving and then creating the model that you want to see. And I think there's a lot of us out there that wish the products we were getting and the things that were on offer reflected that same model of giving
Mm.
back, of exchange with community, of honoring legacies of colonialism and systemic oppression. And then also taking time. Like, I know that we all, from time to time, and some of us more than others, will buy from Amazon, but I don't think for a lot of us that that's reflective of the world we want to live in. And so the Rebis, everyone listening, is an opportunity to invest in a product that's more slowly made and really beautifully crafted, and that's paying artists. That's another thing that doesn't happen enough. And then giving back to organizations that are doing really difficult and important work. So yes, celebrating you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yes. We're coming to the end. I think we have just a couple more questions. And I wanted to take us to your Substack newsletter, which is called Understories. And this is the place where you're playing and practicing and publishing and sharing your poetry and essays. And you wrote a beautiful piece about rivers and resilience. And I want to highlight the first couple lines, and then I'm going to jump to the footnote or a footnote on this piece. But you write in the essay, "This is what magic feels like, rivers flowing out of my body, like the rivers flowing out of Eden. I return to this visual again and again and again throughout my life. The open palm, the water, that quiet feeling of power." And I just wanted to lay that out for everyone as a beautiful definition of magic. And I think the river, we see the river in a lot of different cards in the tarot deck, including the Chariot, though it's kind of buried in there. But then I wanted to come to a footnote, and I'd love to read it because I kind of want you to receive it and see what comes up for you hearing your own words. But first, I want to make sure I pronounce this word correctly. Is it Merkava, or do I say it differently?
It's Merkava.
Merkava. Okay, thank you.
And to listeners who are Jewish and speak Hebrew, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, because I think that's how it's pronounced.
Okay, great. Okay, here's the footnote to Rivers and Resilience. There is a school of early Jewish mysticism called Merkava mysticism, Merkava being the Hebrew word for chariot. It centers on stories of heavenly ascent, describing the visions of exiled prophet Ezekiel as he sits by a river. While contemplating the water, he sees a fiery chariot emerging from the sky, led by 4 otherworldly beings and containing wheels within wheels. Jewish mystics have contemplated the accounts of these visions for centuries, how Ezekiel reimagines the chariot from a war machine, this violent and destructive vehicle, into something profoundly divine. This summer, I took a class called Becoming a Merkava, Wheel, Wing, and Harness, with historian Dr. Yosef Rosen, who explained that, quote, "The chariot is the spirit become mobile, which is an apt description for a river. There are many other sacred rivers described throughout ancient texts." So I just love all the associations in this footnote. And I don't know that I have a question, but I definitely wanted listeners to hear that and maybe just invite you. Is there anything that comes up for you as you hear those words come back to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm Jewish. I grew up with a very fraught relationship with my Judaism, but I'd never explored Jewish mysticism before. I'm not an expert, but when I saw this class being taught around the time that I was bringing the chariot issue together, I thought it was too big of a coincidence to pass up. The synchronicity is what I lean into. And personally, I had been connecting to rivers and using them in my writing. I'd been taking a class on eco poetry. The piece I wrote on rivers was actually generated within that class. And I had been spending a lot of time at the rivers up here in Northern California, the Yuba River and the Russian River, for people who know the area, and just thinking a lot about the metaphor of a river around source up in the mountains, like that kind of source of energy, of wisdom, of life, and how it descends. how it flows, how rivers dry up and come back, how they carve into earth, how they leave behind an imprint, the way rivers can be really slow and gentle, the way that rivers can be really fast, waterfalls, it all kind of was collapsing in together. And the concept of the Merkava, as I've come to know it, is this idea of vision work. And a lot of vision work in the Jewish tradition happens at rivers. Like
Mm,
it becomes the setting for expanded states of consciousness, like moving water,
hmm
which I think is kind of related to the chariot in the sense of like sitting with and giving attention to what's moving within you. And it's almost like initiation, is the word that came up a lot for me. And it felt, if you go deeper into the Merkava story, it's what emerges is that, like, at the time and in historical context, chariots are this very like masculine, violent, colonizing power. Chariots are war machines. There's a whole
hmm
book on this. There's a book on chariots as a war machine, and it's like it talks about the evolution of the wheel and the domestication of horses, and the concept that chariots allowed armies to move faster, to have this elevated state where they were a little bit more protected. One person would drive the chariot, the other person would have like bows and arrows on the back of it,
mm,
and it really changed the nature of war and of the elite. And so in the Merkava story, Ezekiel is driven out of his home by people in chariots, kind of like an army pushes him out, and he's isolated and alone on the river. And he has this vision of this celestial chariot, this like fiery chariot emerging from the sky, this kind of like more angelic chariot. And it kind of turns into a reimagining, like a reclaiming. It takes something that is violent and symbolic of Exodus and kind of elevates it to the spiritual. And that is kind of personally relevant for me. I like the concept of, being pushed out of your sense of self, or um,
mm.
not belonging, and then reclaiming your place, reclaiming your purpose. And to see a chariot and not think, oh, this is my destruction, like thinking of it as like, oh, this is ascension. This is me tapping into a higher state of consciousness. This is my vision. It just felt really powerful, when I learned about that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's really, really rich, really profound.
yeah, and for anyone, I have a recommendation for anyone who's interested in the river aspect of this. There's a documentary called River that's streaming. I'm not sure where. I think on Amazon Prime, or you can get it wherever you watch things. But it was made in 2021, and it's just the most beautiful documentary, very spiritual, environmental, kind of has a climate justice angle. But it has a lot of metaphor in there on our relationship to water and movement and change and how the earth is shaped. So that
Mm,
documentary actually was kind of a inspirational point for me as well.
nice. I will have to check that out. Yeah. And then to wrap up our conversation, I wanted to come to this invitation you have on your website, which
Mm.
says, talk to me about creativity, metaphysics, time travel, lost civilizations, lucid dreams, rose gardening, horseback riding, somatic therapy, eroticism, and Mary Oliver. And
All
I
my
think
favorite
that,
things.
yes, and that just speaks to that desire and passion and how you've planted yourself in this relational space of deep conversation. And I'm just curious, is there one of these things in particular at the moment that you're dorking out about in a new way?
Oh man. Well, I'm sort of obsessed with time travel.
Okay.
Not the Hollywood like sci-fi depictions of like going into a time traveling machine, although it's fun and I do enjoy depictions like that. but more like, how does presence and our attention change our relationship to time?
Mm,
How can we change the way we experience time? I've been thinking about time as nonlinear.
yeah.
And if you get deep into physics, this comes up a lot.
Yes.
That time is our felt sense of time is a really shape-shifting thing.
Hmm. Just age and you'll find out.
Yeah, and there's a book called The Order of Time by a physicist named Carlo Rovelli. He's an Italian theoretical physicist and a really gorgeous writer. Like, it is the most beautiful poetic book, scientific book I've read. That kind of changed how I think about time travel. I've always been obsessed with time travel, like since I was a child. But it's kind of related to the rivers, it's like
Mm,
embracing fluidity, embracing cycles, more natural rhythms that are, acknowledging that we are nature, that we are
yes.
part of the earth around us. And so we have winters, we have fertile, creative outpouring periods. We have our own cycles. I mean, all humans, but especially those with, like hormonal cycle fluctuations, people with ovaries or people that kind of have bodies that cycle through different types of, stages of living in life on a monthly or a yearly basis. And I think thinking about the cycles and thinking about time as nonlinear has changed how I approach decision making and relationship building. Thinking about things as seasons, like when I'm in
Mm,
a really tough season, thinking that this is a season and a cycle, and like there will be movement through it, is really nourishing to me, even if it's a long, long season. Like parenting is a long season.
yes.
Um, and so, yeah, the idea that we can, through our own decision making, change how we experience time and how we travel through time, through somatic work, through forest bathing, through walking somewhere instead of driving there, maybe in your own town, through being able to hit fast forward or rewind or pause, and feeling like you actually can control what you move and the pace that you set. In many cases, maybe not in all cases. For example, you can't necessarily control deadlines that are out of your control at a corporate job, but that's kind of been swirling inside of me, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes much sense. And I join you in that experience of shifting perception to cyclical time being a very refreshing and expansive thing, very forgiving and very sane, I think, compared to the linear time we're kind of presented with from the culture. And I'll just add on a little bit of my own dorkiness with time and time travel. I can, one of the things, if I were to put a similar paragraph on my website, it would also include like the paranormal. And
Mm-hmm.
there are many instances in that category of people who either like lose time. They have this experience that feels like 15 minutes and it was like 4 hours. And also people kind of encountering other humans that seem to have like there's sort of evidence or there's cues around this person that suggests maybe they sort of slipped through time based on like what they're wearing or how they don't have like any of the present day kind of things you see with them. So I'm always really fascinated by those stories as well, where there's kind of these time portals that get distorted and human beings experience this like shift in time that's unexplainable. So I'll just put those sprinkles on top too. Um, but I'm glad you
Yeah.
chose that topic.
Yeah, we really have no concept of time, and I
We
love I love
don't.
I love sitting in the uncertainty. So I appreciate the paranormal aspects too.
Yes, I love the mystery of it. It's I have this sort of insatiable appetite for it that I almost wonder if it needs a diagnosis. But Yeah. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been such a rich and beautiful conversation. And I know our listeners will have so much more insight and ways to connect with the chariot. And we will all be very excited to see the issue for the star come out, and all of the links to your work, your website, your Substack, the Rebis will all be in the show notes. So I just really appreciate you being here and gifting me with a really nourishing conversation that will be floating through my consciousness for days to come, I know.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is everything to me, and I just really appreciate your invitation and thoughtful discussion questions and prompts for jumping off into various portals.
Big thanks to Hannah for coming on the show and sharing this rich, expansive conversation with me about the chariot, and now sharing it with you. I hope it's got you a little revved up about where you're headed and how you'd like to get there. I'm going to include in the show notes all the links you can use to connect with Hannah and find out more about her and her work, including links to her Substack, Instagram, and the Rebis. And don't forget that you can save 25% off the Chariot issue of the Rebis when you use the discount code Typewriter Tarot, all caps, at checkout. I wanted to add a little footnote to this conversation and point out that last year, 2023, was said to be the chariot year, because when you add up the digits of 2023, 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 3, you get 7, which is the number for the chariot. And sevens in the tarot, especially in the minor arcana, the 7 of wands, the 7 of cups, the 7 of swords, the 7 of pentacles, each of these cards have a bit of tension in them. There's some kind of friction going on. Maybe that's true of every card in the tarot, but the sevens in particular, along with the fives, but the sevens all show us something that's being worked out. There's something that's maybe at odds inside the dynamics of the card. And for me, the chariot year, I went into it thinking like, I'm going to be like driving forward into more success, bigger and better than ever. And while there was growth and all of that, that year was actually quite difficult for me. And there was a period of the year that lasted longer than I wanted, where I felt really lost and I wasn't sure what to do. I had a difficult time getting motivated, moving forward, like conceptualizing the map of where I was trying to go. And I didn't like it. I'm a Capricorn sun, a Capricorn moon, a Taurus rising. I like stability. I like plans. I like knowing where things are kind of headed. But in hindsight, I realized that that lostness was a time for me to re-examine some of the structures that have been created to move things forward. And getting lost and getting confused was really about reevaluation. And then having to choose, what did I want to keep and what was really going to support me in going forward. So I just wanted to add that, because while the chariot, I think when we get this card, is really exciting and really purposeful, there's that element of examination to the card where we have to ask, like, do we have the right vehicle to take us in the direction that we want to go? So if you're getting the chariot card and you're feeling like, oh, this should mean big success, big growth, and you're not actually feeling that, that's normal, or it's happened to someone else, me, and probably some other people too. Actually, there were a lot of people I talked to about last year who experienced something similar or really had a difficult time with a couple different things. And I could see how the chariot year was kind of echoing that same reevaluation for people in different ways in different aspects of life. So just keep that in mind. Should this card start showing up for you, it's still exciting, it's still fruitful. I really appreciate you listening to this episode. I really appreciate you listening to this podcast. If you're enjoying it, come check out more of the things we create and offer through Typewriter Tarot. You can go to our website, typewritertarot.com, and sign up for our newsletter. You can learn about Creative Coven, which is a free gathering we host 8 times a year. There's another one coming up June 20th. And then we've got great essays on our blog. We've got some products, including Tarot for Creative Spirits, and lots more. I also work one-on-one with folks as a tarot reader, a creativity coach. So if you're liking this, come join the community. Thanks for being here. Enjoy your creative and magical life.